Everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Anne. I am the consultant at the Digital Transformation Hub, a part of the Info Exchange group with Connecting Up. The Hub focuses on digital technology as an enabler to support service transformation and new ways of working, assisting nonprofits on a broader digital transformation journey. Before we begin, we'll start with a bit of housekeeping. All lines are muted, so if you have any technical issue, please type it into the chat box and I can assist you. If you have any questions during the sessions, please also type in the chat box and Maris and I will answer them by the end of the webinar. We really encourage you to ask as many questions as you think of throughout the sessions to make this as interactive a session as possible. No question is too silly. If you're on a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, please close all other programs to have the best experience. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you as soon as we have after the webinar ends. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that there will be a short survey after this webinar. Today, I'm excited to welcome you to Cybersecurity 101 with Maris. Hi, Maris.
Hi, Anne. Thank you very much for that introduction. And welcome everyone to this webinar on Cybersecurity 101 with essentials to keep your organization secure. So as Anne said, we'll be running this as a 30-minute session. There's approximately 20 minutes of content, and there's time at the end for some questions and answers. Feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll get to them at the end. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today's webinar will cover a view of current cybersecurity threats facing organizations, the top 5 things all not-for-profit staff must know to keep their organization's data safe, a high-level overview of imperative measures every organization needs to have in place, some resources for you, and then questions and answers that would be particular to your organization's IT environment. Information security practices are no longer a nice to have, given the increasing digital nature of our activities and the threats that we face. We have to build security resilience into our organizations. Security has been in the headlines every month, with a number of organizations across all sectors of the economy being affected. A view of some of the headlines within the community services sector from the past 18 months are on these slides. From the top left, Oxfam had donor information of over 1 million Australians disclosed via a data breach when a database was accessed by a security incident. That was in February last year. The incident in March on the top right involved a caseworker who worked at a community services organization and had access to an IT system provided by the Department of Health and Human Services. After leaving the position, the caseworker's access to the system was not revoked, and thereafter the caseworker accessed confidential information related to children and committed sex offences. On the bottom left, Uniting Care Queensland had an attack on some of its IT systems and had to resort to manual workarounds due to IT systems being inaccessible. And on the right, the incident experienced by Uniting Communities in South Australia, where staff were unable to access a certain system due to a cyber incident, again required manual workarounds and changes in business process. There's a few more on this slide. On the top left, linked to my essay, Government IT System, where individuals' accounts were accessed via stolen password credentials. Now, this was possible because people had used the same password across online IT systems, and when one system had been compromised and passwords obtained, the same passwords gave access to malicious actors on other accounts, and hence information such as driver's license numbers, which are a key piece of identity information. On the bottom left, the Australian Red Cross indicated clients were caught up in a cyber attack where a database of the parent organization, the ICRC, was compromised with personal information of people who had sought services for loved ones being accessed in an unauthorized manner. And recently, on the top right there, with the Russia-Ukraine tensions, we had warnings from the Australian government for organizations across all sectors of the economy to adopt an enhanced cybersecurity posture. Now, while some organizations may not be targeted directly, they could be caught up in attempts to compromise other Australian organizations. And the last one there on the bottom is fairly recent. An NDIS case management system provider caught up in a data breach from last month where personal information relating to customers who use their system and the customer's clients and carers was compromised. And this included the likes of Medicare numbers and tax file numbers. So as you can see from the snapshot of headlines, the incidents vary. In some cases, data is locked up by what is known as ransomware, and in other cases, personal information is disclosed via a data breach. Again, some recent stats. It's important to pay attention sometimes to these numbers because they highlight what's going on in the landscape. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACCC, points out that it's very common for scammers to utilize current events and crises to make scams appear more legitimate. We saw this in 2020 when scammers first used the bushfire emergency and then the COVID-19 pandemic as a basis for new scams. Some statistics there with a loss of 850 million in 2020 to scams. And on the right, a statistic from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre from a recent threat report indicates that over the last year or so, there were 67,500 cybercrime reports to them, and this equates to 1 every 8 minutes. So these increasing events in our headlines and these statistics on cybercrime are indeed a call to action for organizations to review their cybersecurity practices. A key message is that the human element continues to drive data breaches. Based on a recent global investigations report that was released just last month, 82% of breaches involve the human element. So what is this human element? It's that people component. For example, for staff in your organizations to be aware of certain processes on how to securely share information or how to use technology securely by creating a good, strong password. Security behaviors and the culture and sentiment on security within an organization are greatly influenced by you and your perception of risk, and most importantly, these perceptions can be changed. Security is really everybody's responsibility. Let's get into those top 5 things you must know to keep your organization's data safe. And the first one is know how to spot a phishing email. Phishing emails are sent with the aim of tricking a recipient into clicking on links, opening attachments, or giving up their personal information. So this is an example of an email that was received by a staff member at an organization, and it was about, oh, your messages can't be delivered. It looks like they're quarantined. Click here, log in, and we'll deliver your messages. So the staff member clicked on the red button there and was presented with what looked like a standard login page to Microsoft SharePoint. And it had their username already filled in. They entered their password and they clicked login. Now, at that point, they would have given up their password and their access to their Microsoft account. Fortunately, in this case, they had multi-factor authentication employed, which is that additional factor you can use from your smartphone app, for example, in addition to a password. So their account was not compromised. The staff member was still asked to change their password. So if you look at some of the telltale signs from this email, the address that it's from is a .de extension. This was an Australian organization, so it may not be applicable because if it was coming from your help desk, you should pay attention to the from addresses of emails. And again, if you look at the link where they had to click on to log in, it looks like a suspect link that doesn't look like it's anything to do with Microsoft. That's one example on a phishing email where account credentials or usernames, passwords can be compromised. Here's another. This is an example of what is called business email compromise, which has really seen an uptick across Australia in terms of malicious actors trying to divert funds away from organizations. So this was an email request, again, received by an organization's payroll department, appearing to be from a staff member requesting a change of bank details. Here I've changed my bank details. My old account is closed. I've changed to a new bank. Please update my record accordingly. So the payroll department actually responded in a not noticing the from address. And they say, yeah, sure, send me your new details. And it's only when that second email, the image you see on the bottom was received, that the payroll department realized, due to the grammar in the email, something just didn't look right. And then again, there's the email address was nothing to do with this particular organization. It's a different email address altogether. So this is an example of what's called business email compromise. It happens in this case where they're trying to divert funds away from, a staff member's change the bank details, or it could also be a supplier invoice that's been intercepted, and they're trying to divert payment from a legitimate supplier to themselves, to a malicious party. This is the third example on a phishing email. This one says, you've got an outstanding invoice. Click on this attachment, open it, and you'll get more information. Again, if you look at the from address, are you doing business with a country, and might be .de, the extension of that. I'm not sure if it's Germany or Denmark. Are you doing business with an organization there? Then again, attachments, if you're not expecting them, please be very careful when you receive emails with attachments, because if you were to open an attachment like this, you can have virus or malicious software installed on your machine, and that's how ransomware happens, where your data is locked up. So if you're ever not sure about an attachment, pick up the phone, don't respond to the email, pick up the phone and ask for an alternate means. Did you expect me to pay this? Have you had some change in your process? That's what we find is the best way to address these sort of tactics that are being used. All right, this is a useful poster which highlights the general attributes of a phishing email. Note that not all of these may apply because phishing emails can have different intents, as we've just seen. So with phishing, the attacker uses social engineering principles to trick the person into performing an action. So these principles may be a sense of urgency or scarcity. And if we look at the example here, the message is that you are eligible for a tax refund. I mean, who wouldn't like that? So it would be really enticing to, click on the attachment and have a look and see whether it is in fact true. And while this poster references what to look out for in emails, the same technique is also used to get people into clicking on links via text messages or, messaging apps. So the other means are just as prevalent. It's not just email. So always be aware of what you're asked to click on or open, regardless of the technology in use. Another means that's also used for social engineering is via phone calls as well. Many people have received phone calls. It sounds like it's from Amazon. You're expecting a parcel, and they're just not all legitimate at all. All right, now we have a poll with 2 questions that Anne will be putting up along the topic of can you spot a phish? These are taken from the ACCC Scam Watch quiz. So the first question is, you received this email from MyGov asking you to verify your identity. What would you do? So we'll give everybody some time to have a look at this. The options, the answers are below, and there'll be the same answers in the poll that will pop up. So have a look at the screenshot here based on some of the signs that we've talked about, and think about which option you'd pick, and then we'd have Anne put the poll up. Anne, ready when you are?
Okay, I will start showing the result.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, I can't see the results. Sorry, would you mind reading out the answers?
Yeah, sorry, the results, it's 100% show that they should delete the email and it's a scam.
Yeah, that's great. It is a scam. The Australian government will never ask you to follow a link in an email or SMS to verify your identity. Another sign that it's a scam is the sender email, looking like it's the Australian government, but no reply at aussie.com. That doesn't really sound right at all. Australian government addresses would end in .gov.au. Another way to check would be to hover over the link on the image here and see what that looks like, and if it is, a legitimate government site. Thank you for that. We've got one more. Again, the second question, your boss sends you this email. What should you do? So similar, we've got 2 responses, and Anne will pop the poll up once you've had a chance to look at this, and pick one of the answers, please.
Yes, I'll give everyone another 5-7 seconds to have a look at the email before I launch the poll. I'll launch the poll now.
Thanks.
So 11 people have responded. Please feel free to continue to respond to the poll. I'll quickly close the poll now.
Yep.
So what 83% responded that they should ignore the email and contact IT, and another 17% said they would buy the gift cards.
Okay, thank you, Anne. The correct answer is ignore the email and contact IT. This is not your boss. If you look carefully at the sender's address, the letter I in there is a different font, and that's another tactic that's used in terms of mimicking fonts to make them look like the correct letter in the English alphabet. And this is another type of common scam where gift cards are used again to channel money away from organizations. So if you were to receive something like this, even if it says ASAP, just pick up the phone, use a different way. Don't reply to the email and ask whoever the requester is, did you really send me this? Did you expect me to do this? Okay, that was it on phishing. The second point is on protecting information. So a number of data breaches happen due to human error, as we heard in the earlier statistic, and people not storing or sharing information securely. So information is a key asset of an organization and it has value, so it must be protected. And this is particularly true for sensitive information such as health data and client records, which many not-for-profits and community service organizations would handle. So if in your organization you collect information that's considered confidential or sensitive by certain industry standards or laws, you must take reasonable measures to protect it. And these measures could be, for example, collecting only the information you need for a particular purpose, ensuring that sensitive data such as health data and client records is only stored in certain locations where it is appropriately secured, and that could be, for example, in a client and case management system, and that access to the system is protected with strong passwords and multi-factor authentication where possible. Another measure may be ensuring there is awareness among volunteers and staff on how certain types of information are to be handled and communicated. A number of not-for-profits have volunteers that work with them, so extend your security awareness and practices not only to your staff, but to anybody in your organization who may handle information of a sensitive nature. And also, it's very important that you store information where it should be stored so that it is backed up. In the event that your machine fails or your data is locked up by ransomware, as we touched on earlier, then you can rely on your organization's backup to restore that information. So that's the second one, protecting information. The third one is on using good password practice, and we've spoken briefly about this already. But a good password may be based on a phrase that you know. You could compose the password by picking out the first letters of some of the words, capitalize some, add in some digits. You may also hear the term, which is becoming more commonplace, passphrase, which is essentially 4 or more random words strung together to make a password. It's really important to keep your personal details out of it. It's also really important not to reuse passwords, because if a password is compromised from one system and it's been reused on another, it's easy for an attacker, a malicious actor to get into this other system. And we saw that in the example with the MySA GovIT, the headline that we spoke about earlier. And if you need to write down passwords, store them securely, not on a post-it note on your screen. And if you have too many passwords to remember, do consider a good password manager. The other point in terms of passwords and access is multi-factor authentication, or MFA, and it's that practice of using a password and another factor to log into an account. So examples of some MFA applications are on this slide. So you've got Microsoft Authenticator, there's also Google Authenticator, which are apps that you can have on a smartphone, and you can use those as the additional factor in addition to your password to log into a system. Another practice as far as passwords, it's that it's best not to share them. Sharing IT accounts and passwords is generally not good practice, but understandably, this may not always be possible if you have volunteers within your organizations. that may not always be possible to have separate accounts. So if you do share accounts, be cautious of how you share the password with others who need to know it. And if somebody who knows the password leaves the organization or is no longer doing work for you, then change the password. That's some of the ways you can get around the use of shared passwords, just to keep that password only known by those who need to have it. The fourth is on keeping your device secure. So this is in a physical sense as well as securing the software on your device. So physically protect your device when when you're traveling, when you're carrying it around. And it's good practice to lock your screen, especially when you step away from your machine, particularly if you're dealing with sensitive information that may be within a document or in a client case management system that's up in your web browser. Lock your screen. It's also really important to keep your devices up to date. Because this is a method that is used to compromise systems where software has vulnerabilities, they're exploited, and ransomware and the likes can get onto organization systems. And at this time, a number of people are still working remotely or in some sort of a hybrid mode. So if your PC is used by your children, for example, be aware of what they do on that machine. If they install software such as games, sometimes these can have malicious components that can be installed as well. And if they're accessing games online, there's also the risk of visiting websites or clicking on links that, again, could result in malware being downloaded onto your machine. And there are a number of organizations who report breaches because there's an infected home PC that they're using without appropriate protections. And if you're using your own device, what's known as bring your own device or BYOD, such as a mobile phone or other device for work within your organization, only store the information that your organization is comfortable for you to store on it. And if you're not sure about that, ask the question. Also, ensuring that the device has appropriate controls is important. So that means a passcode or that security updates on the device are installed. And if necessary, there's a remote wipe capability in case you lose your device and you need to clear your organization's data or your own personal data. That's an important one to consider. And the last of the 5 is reporting anything you're not sure about. So we can have all the measures we've spoken about, being aware of phishing emails, trying to protect our information and store it appropriately, look after our devices, have good passwords, but sometimes security incidents can't happen. That's the nature of the digital landscape these days. So security incidents are adverse events which pose a threat to an organization's information systems and services. So these could be unfamiliar activity on your device, information has been emailed or disclosed to the wrong person, a device has been lost, or you have a removable media USB stick that's lost, it had sensitive information on it, an unescorted person on your office premises. If you're more back to working in the office, make sure that you're aware of who's around. You may not be aware of who are new staff members and who are not. And ensure who you know to report security incidents to within your organization. That could be a touch point within your organization. It could be your IT service provider. The Australian Cybersecurity Centre has expanded its national hotline. This was done late last year, and for the benefit of small and medium-sized organizations. This is a useful resource. It's 1300 Cyber 1. If there's an incident that happens and you're not sure about it, that's a good reference to have on hand. All right, that's it in terms of the top 5. So some key takeaways is to always use strong passwords. Be aware of phishing emails as we touched on. Also remembering that email addresses can be spoofed, so they can look like they are legitimate. So always validate requests if you're not sure about an attachment or you're not sure about a request to pay a supplier or change payroll details, for example. And remember that fraudsters can create websites that look like the real ones, as we saw in the example with the SharePoint site where a staff member was asked to put in their username and password. It's not difficult to do that. So particularly for your bank or finance related matters, always go directly to the website in your web browser. The last 4 here, which are in a different color of font, are what your organization should have in place. And if you're not sure, ask the question, where should you be storing certain types of information so that it's appropriately protected and backed up? The use of multi-factor authentication on accounts that have access to important information is key. Also ask about your security policies. What are the expectations? What should you be doing and how are you expected to handle your information and technology? And who do you report something to within your organization if you're not sure from a security incident perspective? Some useful resources, which are references from the Info Exchange Digital Transformation Hub. These will be in the pack that Anne will be sending out to you. We've got some guides on the hub. There's the opportunity to book a consultation with a technology advisor. Cybersecurity is just one of the areas we work in. There's a number of other domains such as digital marketing, information systems. So if there's interest in that, feel free to book a session. Some links there on how to spot a phishing or scam message and where to report a scam if you're concerned. Have I been pawned? The third last link there is really useful. You can check if your personal details have been caught up in a data breach. That's run by an Australian security researcher, Troy Hunt, who's very reputable. And he gets all these dumps of credentials that are found on the dark web, and it might be that one of yours has been caught up, so you should, change your password and the like, and a couple of other links on this slide. Okay, we're cutting it close, but that's the end. Thank you for your time and open to questions and discussion. Thank you very much.
Yes, so we'll start with the first question, Maurice.
Yeah.
It's from Tara. What password management app do you recommend?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Tara. Info Exchange's Connecting Up has a discount on Dashlane. There's a product called Dashlane, which is available via Connecting Up. So it's offered at a discount rate to not-for-profit. So I encourage you to check that out. Dashlane, it's called. The other ones are LastPass, as well as there's one called 1Password. I would encourage you to ensure that whatever password manager you use, there's the opportunity to employ multi-factor authentication on it, as well as if you're using it in an organizational sense, that you can have multiple accounts. So you can have people who have their own account. You can share passwords with people who need to have them via the password manager, and you can restrict it that way. So certain people who might need access to your finance system password could have it, and those who don't need it don't have to have it.
Yeah, thank you, Maurice. Please feel free to pop in more questions in the chat. I will start with some questions from email while waiting for more questions in the chat. A question I got is, if I'm using my own device for work, are there any specific risks associated with that, and how can I manage those?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Anne. So if it's your own device, the first thing is to ensure you know what information you should be storing on it. And or where certain types of information should be. Don't assume that you can just store it on your own device. Where should you be storing it, as we've talked about, so that it is appropriately protected, backed up, and so on. It's also a really good thing to ensure you've got a good antivirus product installed on your machine, and that you keep the software up to date. So that means if it's a Windows machine, you have your operating system updates employed, as well as your web browsers, whether you're using Chrome or Firefox. Make sure that your software is kept up to date.
Great. Next question. What do we do if someone clicks on a suspect link in an email?
Thanks. Yeah, we've covered that a little bit. So a link in an email could be taking you to a web page where you've got to put in your username and password, as we saw. Or it could also be a link that could result in a virus or malicious software being downloaded. So if you've clicked on a link and you didn't realize it was the wrong web page and you entered in your password, the first thing to do is to let your IT team or your IT support provider know, or the internal contact point in your organization, and they would then direct you to make sure that you can change your password. They would do other things like check on the logs if it's Microsoft 365 and make sure that your account's not been compromised, or take steps thereafter. If it's the other point we touched on, which is malware and virus being downloaded, you'd need again to contact your IT provider, ask them to run a scan on your machine, or tell them what's happened, and they should be running an antivirus scan on your machine to make sure that it's not been compromised by a virus and the like. So it's really important in that sense as well to make sure you've got antivirus that's up to date, as well as keeping operating systems up to date, because if you have a virus that's installed, it can take advantage of vulnerabilities that have not been updated or patched on your operating system, and your device can be compromised that way. So I'd say the first thing to do is contact your IT team, whether it's internal or external, and let them know what's happened, and they should be able to take the next appropriate steps there.
Great. We'll still have one more question from the email. If no one pops up any question in the chat, but this will be the last question. So the question is, other than phishing emails, what are some of the other common cybersecurity issues that NFPs should watch out for?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So we've covered off on some of these already. Strong pass, and they're part of the top 5 we talked about. So making sure you have strong passwords and multi-factor authentication, particularly on systems that have, sensitive information, and that you're not reusing passwords across accounts. Another thing would be making sure you've got software updates. Your web browsers, your operating system is kept up to date within your organization, as well as for your own personal devices. Personal security is just as important as an organization security. We all have a digital life, so making sure that you keep your software and IT systems up to date. Another is backing up your data. So if you have a ransomware incident that occurs and your data is locked up, they actually encrypt your data so you can't access it, and they ask you to pay a huge sum of money. If you have a backup of your data that you can restore from, then you don't have to go through the pain of that. So backing up your data, particularly your important data, on a regular basis, and testing that backup every so often. Make sure that you can then restore that backup when you need to is important. I've also had a few instances where personal information has been shared with the wrong person through email. So that's something to be really careful of. If you're emailing somebody, if you're a caseworker, for example, and you're emailing somebody, make sure that it's the right person you're emailing. Sometimes people can have similar names, and you can share the wrong information with somebody who doesn't need to have it. So being careful about how you share personal information. Another one is removing access to IT systems. So we saw that in the headline with the DHHS system. Somebody was a caseworker, they left this organization, their access to the system was not removed, they then logged back in, got access to information about children, and went on to commit offenses. So if people leave your organization, make sure you've got a good process to ensure that their accounts are terminated when they leave, or if it's a shared account, change the password so that it's not known to the person who's left. And I guess the last one I would mention would be business email compromise, where we saw some of the examples with the phishing email where funds are diverted. So just to be aware of that, whether it's a supplier or whether it's a staff member who might be asking for a change of bank details. I would say those are the key things to be across.
Yes, and then we have another question from Vaughn in the chat. Do you have a course you recommend for new employees to take to train them on phishing scams? And then Tara suggested that we have used ESET Online Free and Good. So Maurice, do you have any suggestion?
Yeah, there's a good number of providers on there. If you're looking to, I suppose, track that your staff have done a course, there's a few platforms. The price ranges would vary. There's one called, there's ESET, as Anne mentioned. There's also one called Know Before, so the word know, the number 4, and the word BE. There's also a wide number of free resources online, which one of them was in the resource section there from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre. It's a simple, quiz with online questions. There's also another one on the ACCC, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission website on how to recognize scams. So there's a few options out there.
Great. So I guess that's all the questions for today. Thank you for joining us in this webinar, and then I'm looking forward to seeing you in the upcoming ones. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.